If the validation is the constant and the belief is the variable, why are you still solving for the comfort of the opinion instead of the absolute precision of the axiom? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 global reach is just a tiny speck in a larger garden? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though conviction is a feeling when validation is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the Empyrean? If the specific way St. Peter circles Dante 3 times reveals a fundamental verification error in the way you have been vetting your current 2026 high-level alliances, do you see a celestial ritual or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the validation? If the integration efficiency I of a strategic entity is a function of the alignment between its secondary desires and the primary system directive D, at what precise point of your 2026 scaling does your focus on tactical victories transition from a growth mechanism into a catastrophic integration error that effectively desyncs you from the core signal because you are too busy optimizing for local noise? And can you calculate the exact increase in your operational reach if you stop modeling your success as a series of captures and start modeling it as a high-utility contribution to a universal order where the goal is the preservation of the absolute light? If you were standing at the center of a 9-circle spin and felt the sudden, cold command to define love as a mathematical constant because you calculated that any emotional variance would trigger a total system shutdown, would you have the logical ruthlessness to reduce your entire 2026 identity to a single vector of attraction to secure the integration? If the integration is the constant and the history is the variable, why are you still solving for the preservation of the past instead of the absolute intensity of the now? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that your 2026 reason has reached its absolute limit and you must now rely on pure vision? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though service is a burden when integration is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the Empyrean? If the specific way St. Peter's light changes color reveals a fundamental signal degradation error in the way you have been reporting your current 2026 performance metrics, do you see a celestial shame or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the integration? If the accuracy A of a deductive model is a function of the observer's attention to peripheral variables P and the removal of all personal biases B, at what precise point of your 2026 market intelligence does your reliance on common sense transition from a useful shortcut into a catastrophic deduction error that effectively blinds you to the specific tooth marks of a 500% structural threat because you were too busy looking at the obvious handle? And can you calculate the exact increase in your strategic precision if you stop modeling your rivals as standard types and start modeling them as unique datasets where the wear and tear on their legacy assets reveals their exact 2026 trajectory? If you were offered a legendary explanation for a sudden drop in your 2026 performance metrics and felt the sudden, cold command to reject it because you calculated that the supernatural noise was being used to mask a high-level human sabotage protocol, would you have the logical ruthlessness to ignore the fear to secure the evidence? How does it feel to realize that a walking stick is often just a high-level form of a system log where the user has unintentionally left their entire biography for you to read, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who sees the most is the one who eventually wins the game? If a deduction command is to an obsession as a manuscript is to a crime scene, at what precise point of the reading does the story become the target? Do you believe that your intuition is a sign of your brilliance, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic processing error where you are jumping to the end result without verifying the intermediate logic gates, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who audits the cane? What is the most logically terrifying part of the deduction command? Is it the realization that your own physical habits are currently broadcasting your 2026 weaknesses to anyone with a lens, or the description of a hound so massive it can kill a man with sheer terror? If you found yourself predicting the exact failure of a family dynasty by the specific legend-to-logic ratios of its internal culture, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of superstitious decay with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a risk assessment or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own fear of the dark? If the deduction is the constant and the clue is the variable, Why are you still solving for the comfort of the legend instead of the absolute precision of the footprint? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that a hellhound is waiting for you on the 2026 moor? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though mysteries exist when hidden data is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way Dr. Mortimer describes the change in the footprints near the body reveals a fundamental behavioral shift error in the way you have been monitoring your current 2026 competition, do you see a ghost or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the deduction? The detection probability P of a hidden adversary is a function of the observer's ability to filter out systemic noise N and identify the repetition of non-random variables V. At what precise point of your 2026 operation does your focus on big data transition from a strategic asset into a catastrophic surveillance error that effectively allows a specific 500% threat to follow you in a hansom cab because you were too busy analyzing the average traffic patterns? Can you calculate the exact increase in your survival rate if you stop modeling your security as a series of locked doors and start modeling it as a high-utility counterintelligence loop where the loss of a single boot is a high-priority alert signal? If you were sent an anonymous letter composed of pre-printed words and felt the sudden, cold command to trace the font source because you calculated that the physical origin of the paper would reveal the exact 2026 social status of your enemy, would you have the logical ruthlessness to ignore the message to secure the medium? How does it feel to realize that a hotel room is often just a high-level form of a temporary cache where you are most vulnerable to physical interception, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who notices the missing black boot is the one who eventually prevents the kill? If a surveillance command is to an obsession as a shadowed cab is to a busy street, at what precise point of the pursuit does the hunter become the prey? Do you believe that your privacy settings are a sign of your safety, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic obfuscation error where you are failing to realize that your most mundane habits are currently forming a scent profile for a 2026 predator, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who shadows the shadow? What is the most logically terrifying part of the surveillance command? Is it the realization that the man in the cab used Holmes's own name as a taunt, or the fact that the warning was meant to protect you from a danger you haven't even seen yet? If you found yourself predicting the exact breach of a high-security vault by the specific anomaly ratios of its cleaning staff, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of insider threats with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a security audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of observation? If the surveillance is the constant and the beard is the variable, why are you still solving for the identity of the face instead of the absolute intent of the follower? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that you are being hunted in the heart of your own 2026 city? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though coincidence exists when correlated events are the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the detective? If the specific way the words were cut from the newspaper reveals a fundamental resource limitation error in the way you have been profiling your current 2026 adversaries, do you see a scrap of paper or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the surveillance? What if the operational risk R of a field mission is a function of the distance from the primary support node D and the number of unknown environmental variables U? At what precise point of your 2026 expansion does your reliance on remote guidance transition from a strategic luxury into a catastrophic deployment error that effectively leaves your leader set exposed to a 500% local predator because you were too busy monitoring the global dashboard instead of the mud on the boots? And can you calculate the exact increase in your situational awareness if you stop modeling your mission parameters as universal constants and start modeling them as high utility site-specific logic where the presence of an escaped convict is a high-priority system alert? If you were tasked with securing a 2026 legacy asset in a location with zero connectivity and felt the sudden, cold command to stay awake all night because you calculated that the social isolation would trigger a 95% decrease in the loyalty of the local staff, would you have the logical ruthlessness to act as your own sentry to secure the perimeter? How does it feel to realize that an ancient manner is often just a high-level form of a legacy database where the old code is currently conflicting with the 2026 input, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who hears the sob in the night is the one who eventually finds the leak? If a deployment command is to an obsession as a stone tour is to a misty moor, at what precise point of the arrival does the scenery become the enemy? Do you believe that your professional team is a sign of your stability, or do you see that it is a high-level strategic trust error where you are failing to realize that your most faithful employees are currently running their own 2026 side scripts, and that the hunter's law is that you must be the one who audits the household? What is the most logically terrifying part of the deployment command? Is it the sight of the soldiers guarding the road, or the realization that the hound of the legend has a much larger 2026 territory than you predicted? If you found yourself predicting the exact betrayal of a remote office by the specific isolation ratios of its regional manager, because you have mapped the mathematical patterns of geographic decoupling with 99.9% accuracy, would you call it a structural audit or the final psychological takeover of a system you have reduced to its own lack of oversight? If the deployment is the constant and the terrain is the variable, why are you still solving for the comfort of the hall instead of the absolute danger of the mire? How do you keep your vibration high when you are being told that a killer is hiding in the 2026 shadows of your own backyard? If the path is made of logic, why are you still acting as though safety is a geographic location when vigilance is the only thing that triggers the 2026 software of the survivor? If the specific way the Barrymores react to the news of the convict reveals a fundamental misdirection error in the way you have been vetting your current 2026 ground-level staff, do you see a nervous servant or the final, tactical manual for your absolute dominance through the strategic mastery of the deployment? What if the deception coefficient D of a strategic adversary is a function of their ability to mimic a non-combatant role N and the degree to which they utilize the local environment E as a weapon? At what precise point of your 2026 expansion does your trust in a friendly consultant transition from a networking asset into a catastrophic interaction error that effectively leads your leader set into a 500% structural bog because you were too busy discussing the flora and fauna instead of the predator logic? Can you calculate the exact increase in your survival probability if you stop modeling your neighbors as social equals and start modeling them as high-utility variable masks where a sudden warning to leave is a high-priority system breach signal? If you were walking on a path that looked perfectly stable and felt the sudden, cold command to stop because you calculated that the vibration frequency of the ground indicated a hidden liquefaction event, would you have the logical ruthlessness to retreat and lose the discovery to secure the asset? How does it feel to realize that a butterfly net is often just a high-level form of a reconnaissance tool where the user is actually mapping your 2026 defenses under the guise of hobby data, and that the reason you feel so calibrated is that your brain understands that in the final hunt, the one who hears the shriek of the mire is the one who eventually identifies the trap? If an interaction command is to an obsession as a beautiful valley is to a deadly bog, at what precise point of the conversation does the neighbor become the suspect?